for my daily drawing today, I'm going to try and talk as I draw to explain what it is that I'm doing as I go. So to begin with, I've just got some cartridge paper, so slightly thicker than printer paper, but not overly special. And I've chosen one of these Unipin fine line pens, which is waterproof because I hope to add some watercolour in a minute. Widely available, lots of stationery shops or newsagents sell them, as well as art supplies shops. So first of all, I'm going to draw the stalk. I'm going to avoid trying to get caught up in any botanical names of any part of this dandelion. I've gone for a dandelion because they were growing outside the studio. They're prolific, they're wild. I don't feel too bad about picking one of them because there are so many others. And hopefully it's something that you can find. And you don't necessarily have to pick it. It's pouring with rain today, otherwise I might sit outside and do this. But hopefully it's a relatable species. So already I'm drawing ahead and not explaining what I'm doing. I've drawn the stalk, so now I'm just working with the closest parts to it. And something I try and do is try not to think about what each element actually is, whether it's a leaf or petal or whatever, because sometimes your brain can start adding in more information than it needs to at that point and tell you that a leaf is a certain shape or a petal is a certain shape or it's doing something a certain way. Whereas if you just look at it for the shape it is, it helps you draw what you can actually see and not make up stuff about it and just go wild doing a certain shape rather than the one that is actually before you. So as well as looking at the shape of the thing that's there, I'm also looking at the gaps that are left in between, and that just helps me work out the spacing of everything, really. Turns out it's quite hard to talk and draw, so bear with me on this. So yeah, just looking at the actual shape that I see and the space in between it. Hopefully you can see a similar view to me. You're slightly further forward than I am, but hopefully it's close enough. I'm going to try and keep my left hand fairly still holding the dandelion so that I get the same view. And I'm trying to draw it realistically, but I'm not going to go in huge detail. It's not a traditional botanical drawing where every little bit is noted. I find that drawing amazing and I'm quite in awe of it, but it turns out I haven't actually got the patience or haven't developed the skill to do that style myself, so I tend to go for just the main outlines, a little bit of detail, and then add a bit more information through the colour that's added as well. And hopefully that way it's a fairly quick study, because I do like to do a little something every day. I'm just working out, waving the pen around there, I'm just trying to work out which ones I've drawn and which ones I haven't. I find it much easier working from life. I can work from a photograph, but my favourite is actually having something in front of me. And I think I like plants and flowers and various other species like that because they don't move too much. Animals and humans are much more challenging because they don't sit still. But they're a brilliant challenge because of that. So I think to start, plants are quite a good way to go because your muse behaves. Okay. So it's really rainy outside today, which is why our petals are all folded in still. I might pop this in a little vase afterwards and see if it'll open up today. It's really gloomy outside. So you could use pencil if you want to. I instinctively go for pen just because I love the black lines. I really enjoy it. I think I quite like the challenge of drawing straight with pen. It's probably the most daring thing that I do. I'm not a fan of the way pencil smudges, so that often rules that out for me, although you can work with a piece of tissue or tracing paper on the page. I was drawing yesterday with a dip pen, which I really enjoyed, but I thought we'd go for something today that hopefully other people might have at home, so you can have a go at as well. I didn't know that everyone would have a dip pen. I'm just going to try and put that down the way I was holding it just for a second. I may need to put the lid back on the pen because I'll pause just there. And I'm going to use a paintbrush. I can't think what this one is. A Winsor & Newton one. And still quite a small paintbrush, but it ought to do the job just fine. So I just move this down and move the water around to the paint, so I'm less likely to drip it all over the page as I go. And I tend to leave my palette in a bit of a mess, probably. Often because they're colours I'm going to use again. So I'm just getting those wet. So this green here is mainly made up of this kind of sap green here. I'm afraid I don't know the names of all of the colours I've got in here, but it's mainly that one and a little bit of the yellow as well. And this paint palette I keep topping up with various different ones, and I've added in extra colours all over the place. There's two in that back one, just so that I've got the colours that suit me and that I tend to use. So again, I'm starting with the stalk. Don't know if I always do that, maybe I do. It's only when you record it or someone's watching you do it that you start realising what you do routinely. Just dragging all that paint on down. And to begin with, I just want to get colour on the page, roughly the right colours in the right spaces. And then I can let that dry and I can add a bit more and do more shading, etc. there. So looking at this, it is darker down at the bottom here. So I'm just going to add more paint. And we've got the light coming from this side, so it's on the right hand side. So it's such a small space it might not work very well, but I can just leave a bit of extra paint to the left so that hopefully as it dries slightly darker that side. You can hurry this process up. I know a lot of people use a hairdryer to help the paint to dry a bit quicker. I think that will do. So now as I work at the top here, I just have to be careful not to touch this wet paint because it will all bleed into the other. I am going to put a bit of that colour on to begin with. Some very light areas on the tops of these leaves. Sometimes this bit can get quite muddled as to whether it's a leaf or a bit of the plant you're drawing, or whether it's meant to be a white space, so sometimes I get a bit of colour where I shouldn't. I'm going to start working with some darker green, so I've got a bit of darker green in there. I'm just going to add to that other mix. Actually, sometimes I just mix in any other colour because I want it a little bit darker, but it's still quite bright. It's brighter than the green behind it. And you can sort of pull the paint along with the paintbrush Sorry if you can hear the lorries whizzing past the studio outside. Might be able to hear all the water on the road too. Right, coming down there. A little bit there. And quite often I can move on to the next part of the drawing and then realise I've missed a petal or missed a leaf or not done something quite the right colour. And if there's anywhere that is much darker, you can just, like we did before, just put a bit more paint there so that it dries a darker tone. Otherwise we can add some more shading on in a bit when this is dry. Okay. So I might actually go for the yellow next, just because working around all this area in the other green is going to get a little bit tricky while it's still wet. So hopefully just give it a little bit longer to dry. And we've got lots of yellow here, but we've also got a sort of a greyy sort of colour that goes up the middle of those petals. Just mixing my yellows a little bit. This one's nice, but it's really bright, and this one's almost too sort of yolky colour, so a bit of a mix of the two. And using lots of water means it's lighter anyway. The pen does seem to be waterproof, which is good. It's doing these bits that you suddenly realise if they are or aren't, and it would just mean that the ink would bleed, which sometimes creates an effect that's quite nice, and you might want to use that, but I quite like mine to be cleaner, so I really like a waterproof pen. Again, you could have done it with the pencil and then ink it, then paint it rather. Then if you wanted to, you could add some detail with pen afterwards. Endless possibilities, really. So there we are. I'm just going to leave that for a bit because I want that to dry a little bit before I add the colour on the top. And as I'm getting almost impatient to finish this all in one go, it obviously depends how much time you've got when you're painting. I quite often try and do mine all in one go and then close the sketchbook, move on to something else, carry on with my walk, do the next part of the day, wrap orders, etc. If you can leave it out and carry on later, then that's a good option. Got a really bluey greeny colour going on there, which is actually a bit more than we need, so I might tone that down a bit of brown. Getting better, but I think we need a bit more. So even in the time it's taken me to make the next colour, the paint will have dried a bit more on the page. It's quite dark around the bottom here, so again I might leave quite a lot of the paint together. And I'm moving in the direction that the leaf is, or petal, or whatever part of it is, has sort of grown, to try and just emphasise that nice long shape rather than working across it and working with it here. Just pull the ink down to the base there, because again it's a bit darker at the bottom. Just looking where the light shines on it and where the light falls. These ones are slightly darker. So just going over them with the same colour will help increase how dark they are on the page. And then I'm going to return to some of these ones and just put a bit more shading. So the underside of that one's quite dark. A little bit of detail on this one. A central sort of vein on that bit. A little bit around the edge of this. What else have we got? That one at the back. And that one. Okay, so I'll just venture back up to the top and just try and put a little bit. This is a black next to my purple at the back there. I've got a bit of a browny colour, so I'm just heading towards putting a bit of a stripe on some of these yellow ones. And I think, instead of overcomplicating it, I'm just going to leave it there.